Joe Mason floated in zero gravity, blood forming perfect spheres in the air around him. The alien ship's emergency lights bathed everything in a deep red glow. His breath came in short gasps as he pressed his hand against the wound in his side. The Zendari blade had cut clean through his standard-issue diplomat suit. "Got to stop the bleeding," he whispered to himself. His voice sounded strange in the emptiness of the massive ship. Just 3 hours ago, he had been standing with 11 other humans in the grand meeting hall of the Krevex Prime. They were Earth's first diplomatic team sent to meet the Zendari, an advanced alien race that had made contact with humanity 6 months earlier. Joe wasn't a diplomat. He was an engineer, brought along to study alien technology if the chance came up. The meeting had started well. Captain Susan Miller had presented gifts from Earth. The Zendari leader, a 9-foot-tall insect-like creature, had seemed pleased. Then something changed. The alien's posture shifted. Its large compound eyes flashed and Joe felt a chill run down his spine. The Zendari guards moved quickly. Too quickly. Their sharp blade arms cut through the human delegation before anyone could react. Joe watched in horror as Susan's head separated from her body, her expression still frozen in a diplomatic smile. In the chaos, Joe had taken a hit to his side but managed to dive into a maintenance duct. His years in the military had trained him to react to danger without thinking. He'd crawled through the ship's systems until he couldn't hear the screams anymore. Now he was alone, floating in what looked like a storage room. The ship felt empty. Too empty. Joe pushed himself toward a wall and caught a handle to stop his drift. He reached for his communication device, but it was gone, probably lost during his escape. He needed to find something to stop the bleeding. He pulled himself along the wall toward what looked like storage containers. The alien writing made no sense to him, but pictures on the containers suggested medical supplies. Joe broke one open and found strange gel-like substances in tubes. "Better than nothing," he said. He squeezed blue gel onto his wound. It burned at first, then cooled rapidly. The bleeding slowed. A voice boomed through the ship, speaking in the clicking, hissing language of the Zendari. Then it switched to perfect English. "Attention, human survivor. This is Commander Zex of the Zendari Exploration Fleet. We have detected your life signs. The ship has been contaminated by human biological material. All Zendari personnel have evacuated. The vessel is now on automated course to star HD 459872. Estimated time to reach destination, 30 Earth days. There will be no rescue. Your species' resistance to our methods was unexpected. Consider your slow death a mercy compared to what awaits your planet." Joe's blood ran cold. They were going to crash the ship into a star with him on it, and they were planning something for Earth. He needed to think. 30 days was a long time. Maybe he could find a way to send a message home, or take control of the ship. First, he had to stop dying. Joe opened more medical containers and found something that sealed his wound better than the blue gel. His military training as a combat engineer had included basic field medicine. That might keep him alive, but he needed food, water, and a plan. He pushed himself toward the exit. The ship was enormous. The Krevex Prime was one of the largest vessels in the Zendari fleet, over 3 miles long. During their tour, the humans had seen only a small portion of it. The corridor outside was empty, the red emergency lights making everything look like a scene from hell. Joe pulled himself along using the handles on the walls. In the distance, he heard the low hum of machinery. At least life support was still working. He found his way to the human quarters. The Zendari had given the diplomatic team a section of the ship modified to Earth gravity and atmosphere. If he could get there, he might find supplies. The door to the human section was sealed. Joe studied the control panel. His job back on Earth had been designing power systems for space stations. He understood enough about alien tech to recognize basic patterns. After 30 minutes of trying different combinations, the door slid open. Inside, artificial gravity pulled him to the floor. His legs nearly buckled after hours in 0G. Yannick content, human quarters were untouched. Bags and personal items were still where the team had left them. Joe felt a wave of sadness seeing Susan's family photo on her desk. All those people, gone in minutes. He found the supply room and gathered food packets, water, and a first aid kit. His side throbbed with pain, but the alien medicine seemed to be working. Joe sat on a bed and tried to think. The Zendari had left him for dead, but they'd made a mistake. They'd left him with access to part of their ship. If he could figure out how to use the alien systems, maybe he could change the ship's course or send a message to Earth. He checked the human communication equipment, but it was dead. The Zendari must have cut the power to those systems. Joe ate some food and drank water. His mind raced with questions. Why had the Zendari attacked? What did they mean by human biological material contaminating the ship? And what were they? Planning for Earth? He needed to explore more of the ship. With his wound patched up and strength returning, Joe packed a bag with supplies. He included tools from the engineering kit he'd brought from Earth. He didn't know if human tools would work on alien technology, but it was better than nothing. Before leaving the human section, Joe found a tablet with language translation software. The diplomatic team had been using it to learn Zendari. It might help him understand the ship's systems. The ship's computer system was voice-activated. Joe had seen the Zendari crew use specific sounds to control doors and lights. He practiced some basic commands using the translation tablet. "System access," he said, mimicking the alien clicks and hisses as best he could. A screen on the wall flickered to life, displaying alien symbols. Joe couldn't read them, but this was progress. He explored beyond the human quarters, moving carefully. The ship was designed for the tall, insect-like Zendari, making some areas difficult for Joe to navigate. In what looked like a control room, Joe found more active screens. He tried different voice commands until one screen changed to show the ship's course. A red line extended from their current position to a bright star. The timer at the bottom confirmed what the Zendari commander had said. 29 days, 14 hours until the ship reached the star. Joe stared at the screen, his face set with determination. He might be alone on an alien ship headed for destruction, but he wasn't dead yet. He was an engineer. He solved problems. And right now his problem was learning how to control this ship. "If you think I'm just going to roll over and die," he said to the empty room, "you don't know humans very well." 7 days passed on the alien ship. Joe had set up a small living area in a maintenance bay near the engine section. The constant hum of machinery kept him company in the endless silence of space. His wound was healing, though the alien medicine had left a strange purple scar. Joe sat cross-legged on his makeshift bed surrounded by alien technology he had collected. He tapped on a small device that projected a 3D map of the ship. Each day he explored more of the massive vessel, marking areas he had visited. "Day 7, he said to himself. "Still breathing. That's something." He had started talking out loud to keep himself sane. Sometimes he talked to his daughter Liz, even though she was millions of miles away on Earth. He imagined her face, her laugh. It kept him going. The ship's life support systems continued to function perfectly. Food was a challenge, but Joe had found alien ration packs that his body could digest. They tasted like wet cardboard but kept him alive. Water was plentiful, recycled through the ship's advanced systems. Joe stood up and stretched. His side still hurt, but he could move well enough. Today he planned to explore the bridge. He had avoided it until now, afraid of what he might find there. But he needed to access the main computers if he wanted any chance of controlling the ship. He gathered his tools and the translation tablet. Over the past week he had learned more Zendari words and commands. Not enough to have a conversation, but enough to operate basic systems. The corridors were still bathed in red emergency lighting. Joe had tried to restore normal lighting, but those systems were locked. He pulled himself along using the wall handles, moving through sections of zero gravity until he reached areas with artificial gravity. The bridge was sealed with a heavy door. Joe studied the control panel beside it. It required a security code. He tried various combinations, but nothing worked. "Think, Mason," he muttered to himself. What would the captain use as a code? He remembered watching the Zendari captain, entering commands. The aliens had forearms and used complex patterns. Joe couldn't replicate that, but maybe there was another way in. He opened a maintenance panel next to the door and studied the wiring. The Zendari technology was advanced, but it still followed basic engineering principles. Power flowed in circuits. Interrupt the right circuit and the security system might fail. After an hour of careful work, Joe managed to bypass the security. The bridge door slid open with a hiss. Inside, the bridge was massive. Curved screens surrounded a central platform where the captain would stand. Control stations designed for the four-armed Zendari lined the walls. The room smelled strange, like cinnamon mixed with metal. Joe approached the central platform. The main computer terminal was still active. He placed his translation tablet on the console and began trying various voice commands. "Computer, status report," he said, using the Zendari words as best he could. The screens flickered. Words appeared, some of which his tablet could translate. "Course locked. 22.4 days until destination. Life support functioning. Security protocols active." Joe tried another command. "Computer, change course." The screen flashed red. "Command denied. Captain authorization required." He tried several more commands with similar results. The main navigation was locked. Without the captain's authorization, he couldn't change the ship's course. Joe sighed and sat in one of the oversized alien chairs. He needed to think of another approach. If he couldn't change the course, maybe he could send a message to Earth or find a way to escape. He tried a different command. "Computer, show communication systems." The screen changed to display a diagram of the ship's communication array. Joe studied it carefully. The main transmitter was powerful enough to send a signal to Earth, but like the navigation, it was locked. As he explored the computer systems, Joe found something interesting. The ship's logs were accessible. He could read the records of the Zendari's activities. He began searching through recent entries using his tablet to translate. What he found chilled him to the bone. The Zendari had been watching Earth for years. Their first contact 6 months ago had been a deception. They had been studying humans looking for weaknesses. The diplomatic mission was a trap, designed to collect human specimens for study. But something had gone wrong. When the Zendari scientists examined the human captives, they discovered something that frightened them. Human blood contained elements that were toxic to Zendari biology. Even small amounts could contaminate their air systems. That's why they had abandoned ship so quickly. They feared contamination, and that's why they planned to destroy Earth. They saw humans as a biological threat. Joe leaned back in the chair, trying to process this information. The aliens hadn't left him to die out of cruelty, but out of fear. Fear of what his body might do to them. He looked at his hands. His ordinary human blood was poison to them. He started to laugh, a hollow sound in the empty bridge. "You should be afraid," he said to the empty room. Joe continued searching through the logs. He found technical information about the ship's systems, including life support, security, and weapons. The Zendari had left in such a hurry that they hadn't bothered to lock many of the information files. As he read, an idea began to form. The ship was still 22 days from the star. According to the logs, a Zendari scout ship would rendezvous with the vessel in 12 days to confirm its trajectory. They wanted to be sure their contaminated ship was properly destroyed. That meant Joe wasn't completely alone. The Zendari would return, if only briefly. He smiled grimly. If he couldn't escape or change the ship's course, maybe he could prepare a welcome for the returning aliens. His military training included not just engineering but combat tactics. The Zendari had left him for dead on their ship. Perhaps he could turn their fear of human biology into a weapon. Joe closed the logs and stood up. He had work to do. The massive alien vessel had become his prison, but it could also become his fortress. The Zendari thought they had left him to die. Instead, they had given him time to learn their technology and prepare. 12 days, he said, gathering his tools. "Let's see what kind of welcome I can arrange for you." He left the bridge with a new sense of purpose. The ship that was meant to be his tomb would become something else entirely. The hunt was on, and this time, the human would be the hunter. 5 more days passed on the Kravex Prime. Joe worked tirelessly, learning the ship's systems and preparing his trap. He slept only when his body demanded it, often waking with nightmares of his friends being killed by the Zendari. Joe stood in what he had discovered was the ship's science lab. The room contained equipment for studying biological samples. He had found this place 2 days ago, and what he saw had filled him with rage and purpose. The bodies of his fellow humans were here. The Zendari had been studying them before they fled the ship. Joe had given his friends as proper a burial as he could, sending their bodies into space through a waste disposal system. He said goodbye to each one, promising revenge. Now he was using the lab for his own purpose. On a table, before him sat vials of his blood. He had been carefully drawing small amounts each day. According to the Zendari records, human blood released particles into the air that damaged Zendari respiratory systems. Even a small amount could cause them severe distress. "Let's see if we can make it more effective," Joe muttered. He had been using the translation software to understand the lab equipment. The Zendari had advanced technology for modifying biological samples. Joe wasn't a biologist, but he had learned enough from the ship's database to use the basic functions. He was attempting to concentrate the elements in his blood that were toxic to the aliens. Next to the lab was the ship's armory. The Zendari had left in such a hurry that they hadn't secured it properly. Joe had found weapons he could barely lift, designed for the stronger aliens. But he had also found devices that seemed to be grenades or mines. He had carefully removed several and brought them to the lab. His plan was taking shape. The Zendari scout ship would arrive in 7 days. Joe was modifying the ship's environmental systems to spread his blood particles through specific sections. He was also setting traps in key areas where the returning aliens would likely go. Joe left the lab with several vials of processed blood and headed for the environmental control room. His body had adjusted to the ship's slightly different gravity and atmosphere. The wound in his side was fully healed, though the purple scar remained. The environmental controls were complex, but Joe had spent days studying them. He had created a separate system for sections of the ship, isolating them from the main life support. When activated, these sections would fill with air containing his blood particles. Any Zendari entering would quickly become sick and disoriented. Joe connected his vials to the system and programmed it to activate on his command. He had set up similar systems throughout the ship, creating a network of death zones he could control. 7. "More days," he said, checking his makeshift calendar. "Then we'll see who's hunting who." He returned to his living area in the maintenance bay. Over the past days, he had made it more comfortable, bringing items from the human quarters and things he found around the ship. He had even managed to increase the lighting, changing the red emergency glow to a more natural color. Joe sat on his bed and opened a small device he had found in the captain's quarters. It appeared to be a personal log. Most of the entries were in Zendari, but his translation software helped him understand parts of it. The captain's name was Vrax, a high-ranking commander in the Zendari fleet. Vrax had been studying humans for years, sending drones to Earth to collect data. The Zendari were interested in Earth's resources but saw humans as pests to be eliminated. Their original plan was to take the human diplomatic team, learn all they could from them, then launch an attack on Earth. But when they discovered human biology was toxic to them, they panicked. They feared an invasion of Earth would result in massive Zendari casualties from biological contamination. Joe put down the device. The Zendari would be back, not just to confirm the ship's course, but to make sure no humans survived to warn Earth. They couldn't risk humans learning about their weakness. He picked up another device he had modified. It looked like a small remote control. Joe had connected it to the ship's announcement system. With it, he could broadcast his voice throughout the vessel. He planned to use psychological warfare against the returning Zendari. The next day, Joe continued his preparations. He went to the weapons storage and selected items he could use. Most were too large for him to handle effectively, but he found some that would work. He placed them strategically throughout the ship. In the medical bay, Joe discovered something useful: Zendari breathing masks. The aliens used them in areas with dangerous chemicals. He took several and modified them to fit his human face. If his plan worked, he would need protection from his own biological weapon. Joe also spent time creating decoys. He used clothing and materials to make human-shaped figures, placing them in various parts of the ship. When the Zendari returned, these would trigger their sensors, making them think there were multiple humans aboard. As the days passed, Joe's preparations became more elaborate. He rigged doors to lock automatically, trapping Zendari in sections filled with his blood particles. He programmed maintenance robots to carry containers of his blood to specific areas when activated. The night before the Zendari scout ship was due to arrive, Joe sat in the captain's chair on the bridge. He had gained access to more ship systems, though navigation remained locked. He couldn't change the ship's course, but he had turned the vessel into a deadly maze. On the screens before him, he could see the approaching scout ship. It was much smaller than the Kravex Prime, probably carrying no more than 20 Zendari. They would dock expecting to find a ghost ship with one dead human. Instead, they would find something very different. Joe checked his weapons and breathing. Mask. The past 12 days had changed him. He was no longer the scared engineer fighting to survive. He had become something else. A hunter, a warrior, a one-man army prepared to take on an alien force. "Welcome to hell," Joe whispered as he watched the approaching scout ship. "Let's see who's left to die this time." The Zendari scout ship docked with a gentle thud. Joe watched from a hidden spot near the main airlock. He wore his modified breathing mask and carried a weapon he had fashioned from alien technology. His heart beat fast, but his hands were steady. Through a small camera he had placed, Joe could see the airlock opening. 5 Zendari soldiers entered the ship. They were tall, with forearms and hard exoskeletons that shimmered green and blue under the lights. Each carried what looked like a rifle. The aliens moved cautiously, clicking to each other in their language. Joe's translation device picked up fragments. "Check life signs, human should be dead, confirm ship course." Joe pressed a button on his remote. The ship's lighting suddenly changed from red emergency mode to bright white, blinding the Zendari momentarily. Their compound eyes were sensitive to sudden light changes. While they were disoriented, Joe activated the environmental controls in that section. Fans whirred as air containing his blood particles circulated. The Zendari didn't notice immediately. Joe moved quietly through a maintenance tunnel he had mapped out. He reached another control panel and activated more systems. Doors threw out. The ship sealed automatically, dividing the vessel into sections. The Zendari were now cut off from their ship. Through the ship's internal communication system, Joe spoke. His voice echoed through the corridors. "Welcome aboard, you left me to die, big mistake." The Zendari soldiers raised their weapons, looking around in alarm. One of them started coughing, then another. The particles were taking effect. Joe moved to another position. His plan was to never stay in one place too long. He had studied the ship's layout until he knew every passage and shortcut. More Zendari entered from the scout ship. Joe counted 15 in total. They spread out, trying to find him. They didn't realize they were walking into his trap. In the HFY Armory section, 3 Zendari triggered one of Joe's devices. It released a cloud of concentrated blood particles. The aliens fell to their knees, struggling to breathe. Their exoskeletons couldn't protect them from something so small in the air. Joe activated more traps throughout the ship. Some released particles, others locked doors or shut down lights. The Zendari were becoming confused and separated. Through his cameras, Joe saw their leader. This alien wore different armor with markings of rank. Joe's translation device identified him as Captain Krell. Krell was shouting orders, trying to organize his soldiers. "Find the human! Kill on sight, return to the ship!" But it was too late for an orderly retreat. The Zendari were already affected by the particles. Some were coughing violently, others moved slowly, disoriented. Joe activated the ship's announcement system again. "Your weakness is now known. Earth will be ready for you." Krell fired his weapon at the ceiling where the sound came from. "Show yourself, human." Joe moved through the maintenance tunnels to the bridge. From there, he could control most of the ship's systems. He locked the doors, trapping various groups of Zendari in different sections. 3 aliens managed to reach the bridge doors. They tried to break through, their powerful arms smashing against the metal. Joe waited. When they finally forced the doors partly open, he triggered another trap. Concentrated particles flooded out, hitting them directly. They collapsed, their breathing labored. Joe checked his camera feeds. 8 Zendari were down, either unconscious or dead. 7 remained, including Captain Krell. They had realized the danger and were trying to return to their ship. But Joe had sealed the path. The only way back was through sections filled with toxic particles. Krell ordered his soldiers to find another route. 2 Zendari found one of Joe's decoys in the science lab. They fired at it, destroying the dummy. While they were distracted, Joe sealed the lab and filled it with particles. Through the camera, he watched them realize too late what was happening. Krell and his remaining 4 soldiers reached a maintenance bay. They were wearing breathing equipment now, protecting them from the particles. Joe hadn't counted on this, but he had other plans. He activated the ship's gravity controls for that section, something he had learned to override. Suddenly, the gravity increased to 3 times normal. The Zendari, with their heavy exoskeletons, could barely move. They struggled to stand as Joe watched through the cameras. Joe spoke through the announcement system again. "Your people killed, my friends. They planned to destroy my world. This ship was supposed to be my grave. Now it's yours." Krell looked directly at a camera. "Human," he clicked in his language, which the translation device interpreted. "You don't understand. Your kind is dangerous. Your biology threatens all Zendari. We must eliminate you before you spread through the galaxy. You should have thought of that before you came to Earth," Joe replied. He increased the gravity again. The Zendari soldiers collapsed to the floor, unable to move. Only Krell remained standing, his powerful legs straining against the crushing force. Joe left the bridge and made his way to the maintenance bay through safe passages he had created. He entered wearing his breathing mask and carrying an alien weapon. Krell saw him and tried to raise his rifle, but the gravity made it too heavy. "One human," Joe said, standing before the alien captain. "Just one. And look what happened to your mighty warriors." Krell's breathing was labored behind his mask. "Others will come. The Zendari fleet will destroy Earth." Joe shook his head. "Not when they learn how vulnerable they are to us. I've recorded everything. Your weakness is no longer a secret." He raised his weapon but didn't fire. Instead, he lowered the gravity back to normal. Krell stumbled forward, surprised. "I'm going to take your ship," Joe said. "I'm going home to warn Earth. You can stay here and die when this vessel hits the star. That was your plan for me, wasn't it?" Krell lunged at Joe with surprising speed. Joe fired the alien weapon. A blast of energy hit Krell in the chest, cracking his exoskeleton. The alien captain fell to the floor. "You should have left us alone," Joe said. He checked the other Zendari soldiers. None were moving. Joe made his way to the docked scout ship. The airlock was open. No one remained aboard. Joe entered the scout ship and studied the controls. They were similar to what he had learned on the larger vessel. He believed he could fly it. He returned to the Kravex Prime one last time, gathering his notes and the translation device. He took samples of his blood weapon and all the data he had collected about Zendari weaknesses. Before leaving, Joe set the ship's self-destruct sequence. He had found the override codes in the captain's logs. The Kravex Prime would still hit the star, but it would explode before impact, destroying all evidence of what had happened, except what Joe was taking with him. He entered the scout ship and sealed the airlock. As he activated the engines, he looked at the massive ship that had been his prison and battlefield. "Not bad for one human left to die," he said to himself as the scout ship detached and turned toward Earth. The journey back to Earth took 18 days. Joe had enough supplies on the Zendari scout ship to last, though the alien food still tasted terrible. The ship was faster than he expected, equipped with technology far beyond what humans had developed. Joe spent the time learning the ship's systems and studying the data he had collected. The more he learned about the Zendari, the more he understood their fear. Human blood released microscopic particles into the air that attacked Zendari respiratory systems. These particles could remain active for days. For the insect-like aliens, humans were walking biological weapons. As Earth appeared on his view screen, Joe felt a mix of emotions: joy at seeing his home planet, fear about what might happen next, and sadness for the friends he had lost. He activated the communication system, hoping it would connect with Earth's satellites. "This is Joe Mason of the Earth Diplomatic Mission to the Zendari. I am approaching Earth in an alien vessel. Please respond." Static filled the speakers, then a voice broke through. "Unidentified vessel, this is Earth Space Command. Stop your approach immediately or you will be fired upon." Joe repeated his message, adding, "I am the sole survivor of the diplomatic mission. The Zendari attacked us. I have critical information about their plans and weaknesses." After a long pause, a different voice came through. "Joe Mason, this is General Frank Harris. We thought everyone on the mission was lost. Can you verify your identity?" Joe provided personal details only he would know. There was another pause, then the general's voice returned. "Approach coordinates are being sent to your vessel. You will be met by a military escort. Do not deviate from the course." To Earth, fighter ships appeared alongside him as he approached the planet. They guided the alien ship to a remote military base in the Nevada desert. As the ship landed, Joe saw armed soldiers surrounding the landing area. When the door opened, Joe stepped out with his hands raised. The bright sunlight hurt his eyes after weeks in the artificial lighting of the alien vessels. A medical team in hazmat suits approached him cautiously. "I'm not contagious," Joe said, "but you'll want to study what I've brought back." The next week passed in a blur of debriefings, medical tests, and questions from military and government officials. Joe told his story many times, showing them the data he had collected. Scientists were especially interested in the blood samples and his notes on how they affected the Zendari. 10 days after his return, Joe was finally allowed to see his daughter, Liz. They met in a comfortable room at the military base. When she walked in, she ran to him, hugging him tightly. "Dad, they told us you were all dead," she said through tears. Joe held his daughter, feeling truly safe for the first time since the attack. "I'm sorry you had to go through that, Liz." Later, as they sat talking, Liz asked, "What was it like on the alien ship?" Joe thought for a moment. "Scary, lonely, but it taught me something important. Sometimes the thing others fear about you can be your greatest strength." The next day, Joe met with General Harris and the President's science advisor, Dr. Beth Allen. They sat in a secure conference room with satellite images displayed on a large screen. "The Zendari fleet has changed course," General Harris said, pointing to the images. "They were heading toward our solar system, but 3 days ago they suddenly turned away." Joe wasn't surprised. "They know their weakness is exposed. They can't risk an invasion when our biology is deadly to them." Dr. Allen nodded. "The technology you brought back is years beyond what we have. The scout ship alone will advance our space program by decades." "What happens now?" Joe asked. "We prepare," the general said. "Just because they've backed off doesn't mean they won't try again. We're setting up a defense system based on what you discovered." Joe was given a new position heading a special research team. His experience with Zendari technology made him uniquely qualified. For months, he worked with scientists and engineers, developing defenses against potential alien threats. The story of what happened on the Kravex Prime became legend. Joe shared only certain details publicly, keeping the most sensitive information classified. Still, everyone knew the basics. One man had faced an advanced alien force and won. 1 year after his return, Joe stood on a platform at the unveiling of Earth's first line of defense, a network of satellites designed to detect approaching alien vessels. The system incorporated elements of Zendari technology that Joe had brought back. After the ceremony, Joe walked with Liz in a park near their home. The events of the past year had changed him. He was quieter, more thoughtful. The nightmares about his time on the alien ship had mostly stopped. "Do you think they'll come back?" Liz asked as they sat on a bench overlooking a lake. Joe looked up at the sky. "Maybe someday, But they'll think twice about it. They know now that humans aren't easy prey. That night, Joe stood on his porch, looking at the stars. Somewhere out there, the Zendari were likely planning, adapting. But so were humans. The scout ship Joe had brought back had given Earth new technologies and new hope. In his home office, Joe kept a small piece of metal from the Kravex Prime. It was a reminder of what he had endured and overcome. The aliens had left him to die, thinking one human was no threat. They had learned a harsh lesson. The next day, Joe received a secure message from General Harris. A deep space probe had detected a transmission in Zendari language. When translated, the message was simple but clear. "Avoid Earth, humans are death." Joe smiled as he read it. The Zendari had spread the word. Earth was now known throughout their empire as a place of danger. The planet that had once been marked for conquest was now a symbol of fear. Not bad, Joe said to himself, for one engineer left behind. He closed the message and joined his daughter for dinner. The stars would still be there tomorrow, and so would the challenges they brought. But tonight, Earth was safe. And Joe Mason, the man who had turned an alien warship into a graveyard, was finally at peace.